Good afternoon and welcome to Sipekne'katik and the LSK School for this important announcement. We want to thank the father and son duo of the Eastern Eagles for that wonderful opening. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that our community is in mourning for the loss of 4 community members this week, and ask that the Creator care for them as they begin their journey to the spirit world. Just take a moment, please. Thank you. I'd like to introduce the people seated up here in front. Start my immediate left, or my immediate right. I'm to his left. Chief Sack, Minister Miller, Doreen Bernard, Cody Blois, also in the audience is Jaime Batiste. Now I'd like to call on Chief Sack of Sipekne'katik.
Thank you, Stuart. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'm honored to welcome Minister Miller, our MP Cody Blois, and another MP Jaime Batiste to our community. I want to thank our elders and our residential school survivors for encouraging us to move on and keep this going. For us, like Stuart said, it's a very hard time. I want people to know that the residential school stuff is not hundreds of years ago. Like we're still dealing with the effects of it daily, and our community has a very hard time and a rough struggle. And it frustrates me being out in the world to hear people talk about it in a past tense where it was 100 or 200 years ago. Like it's something that never should be happening and never should have happened. So today we're honored to have the ministers and the MPs here to let us know what they have for funding available. And I just want to let them know that it's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there's a whole lot more growing and healing needs to happen from this, and myself and council and our community, we're committed to making sure that we all, we have a better future. And it's a rough go for our people, and I couldn't imagine what they went through. So I'm happy to be a part of this today and hoping that we take bigger steps in the future. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, Chief Sack. Now I would like to ask Elder, Indian Resident School Project Coordinator with Mi'kma'ki Burt Cultural Center and Survivors, Doreen Bernard, to come forward for some remarks.
Great. I'm so happy to be here today. There are over 70 survivors in Indian Brook. There are 3 generations of survivors in my family who attended the Sipekne'katik Indian Residential School, and several generations of descendants who have been impacted by the legacy of the residential school. This is the same experience for many of our families here in Indian Brook and across the Maritimes. I'm so happy for this announcement of the funding for the residential school Children's Community Support Funding Program in support of my community and our Sipekne'katik Residential Schools Support Project. This funding will assist in the research and knowledge gathering, healing initiatives, and IRS commemorations that are needed in our community. Survivors and families have been waiting for over a decade for our community IRS commemoration to honor the survivors. Survivors and families from across the Maritimes, the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey, who attended the only Indian residential school in the Maritimes, and Canadians who come to the IRS site have also been waiting for the Atlantic Regional IRS commemoration. In my work as coordinator in the IRS commemoration projects at Mi'kma'ki Burt, survivors indicated that healing and reconciliation must include ceremony and IRS commemoration at the former site for all survivors of the residential school, the children who died there, the ones that are still missing, the ones who may never be found, and those who are still here with us today. Survivors want thorough research of the IRS site, including all the surrounding areas, and are hoping that it will locate burial sites that will be protected. On September 30th to October 3rd, Mi'kmaq DeBert IRS Commemoration Project hosted the Healing and Resilience Gathering for survivors from across the Atlantic region. The resultant themes or pillars that surfaced from that healing gathering were reclamation, hope, love, and gratitude. Dan Wedgie Squaliadiak, from where we have sprouted. Dan Gina Muadesnuk, how will we teach them? Kesalulnuk, I love you all. And Mui Walulnuk, I am grateful for you all. These are the survivors' guiding principles for future development of the IRS commemorations. A special part of this gathering was their attendance on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation to commemorate the Parks Canada National Historic Site with the unveiling of the commemorative plaques. It was important that survivors were engaged for their input, which were implemented, and there was oversight of the survivors on Elders Advisory Council to help to guide this project. Mi'kmaq DeBert has several years of resources in survivors' engagements that can be helpful to commemoration and research for the former IRS site. It is my hope that Sipekne'katik and Mi'kmaq DeBert will collaborate on outcomes of this project to expedite the IRS commemorations in our community and at the IRS site. It is imperative to consider the demographic of the IRS survivors, our elders, knowledge keepers, their health, their challenges, for those who wish to participate in these historic events and projects. I want to congratulate our community, Sipekne'katik First Nation, for their proposal and for Canada's funding for this project that will benefit survivors, our families, our children, grandchildren, through initiatives for commemoration, remembrance, honoring, and education, and healing. Thank you, Mr. Dovala.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you for everything, Doreen, and thank you for your important work you are doing and sharing and your thoughts with us today. I also, my apologies also for to acknowledge MP Dieppe. Hope I said that correct. I now ask Minister Marc Miller of Crown-Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada to come forward for remarks and the important announcement.
Can I apologize for not acknowledging you as well? Sorry about the mask, threw me off.
Well, bonjour, hello. I want to thank the drummers for starting us off in a good way with the honor song. Thank you, Mike Chief Sack, for your important words about today's announcement. thank as well the elder for being here and the work that she continues to do. I can't imagine it to be easy by any sense of the imagination, and I don't think I could ever even attempt to put myself in your shoes. But I want to acknowledge the work that is ongoing, but it needs to continue to ongoing, and the courage that it takes to do that. So thank you for your words. Cody and my Parliamentary Secretary, Jaime Baptiste, Lena Diab, thank you for witnessing this moment, because the role is on us and on behalf of Canada to keep advocating among our own people. Obviously, I don't speak for Jaime, but among our own people in what needs to be done in the next few years, and it won't be an easy or a fast way out. This is my second time in spending some time with Chief Sack and the community over the last few months. I had the honor to, in my former role as Minister of Indigenous Services, to spend some time at the site of the former residential school that operated for well over 37 years and gather my thoughts along with a couple other community members as the search was being painstakingly done by a very qualified team and accompanied by an elder walking every meter or foot of the way. And it's really breathtaking to see what's going around the country. And in this neck of the woods, everyone is now familiar, and if they're not, they should, with the Sipekne'katik residential schools, where people were taken not only from here, but ripped out of communities across Atlantic Canada and taught, abused, and denied a fundamental right, which is to be educated by their own. As we open our eyes, or continue to open our eyes as a country in light of the devastating findings at Kamloops, one among many that has really fixed the imagination of Canada, a reality that was far too long denied to Indigenous peoples that they knew all along, and that Canada has consistently denied the existence, scope, and pain that has been suffered by communities throughout the country and that is ongoing. It's important to mark these events with some level of humility and understanding that I stand on behalf of an entity that was part and parcel, along with religion institutions, in creating this system. And as we speak and acknowledge these discoveries, it's important to understand that communities continue to be reeling. When the news broke, Minister Bennett and I, the minister who occupied the position that I now occupied, and I were on a call with some doctors, Indigenous doctors, in the middle of COVID. So people that understandably are used to dealing with pain, with grief, and with death, with trauma. The news froze them in their tracks, and we had to eventually end the call. Obviously tears flowed and we talked about the events, but had to cancel the call, which was to deal about a once-in-a-lifetime epidemic and the urgent need to keep people safe. But if you imagine the impact that can have on people that don't deal in these matters as an everyday event, you can imagine that the impact can be far severe. And that is indeed what's been happening in the last 6-7 months, as the discoveries has forced our government to look at our relationship with Indigenous peoples through that lens, moving away from our legal obligations to moral obligations. It's become quite clear that we haven't done enough with respect to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action that spelled out in black and white clearly, as clear as day, from calls to action 72 to 76, to honor the survivors, to continue with the searching, knowing the conclusions were not complete, that the search for the truth, as painful as it is, and as the tendency is in human nature for your own healing sometimes to repress the truth, was one that we have to continue to look straight forward in the eye and acknowledge before we can move along on a very, very difficult path that is not complete of reconciliation. It's why that today's announcement, and Mike, Chief Sack, said quite clearly, is just the tip of the iceberg. It's an announcement of about $326,700 to work with the support project in Sipekne'katik, to work with the community in its initial work that is far from complete, as we walk that journey of accompanying survivors in figuring out what the next step is in getting more information as to what exactly occurred at this institution. a lot of these community protocols, and I've had the deep honor of going across the country and talking to survivors and hearing their experience, and it is always surprising, but it shouldn't be, that some people are still speaking up for the first time with respect to issues that perhaps they did not want to air out publicly or take with them as they pass on. And some still suffering in silence, and it is within that optic that we have to understand the searches that go on. It's not just radars scanning furtively over grassland or rough terrain. It's consultations, triangulation, work with communities on protocols, work with folks on healing. It's a much more comprehensive community-driven project that can't be led by the Canada. You can imagine a community's reaction if Canada suddenly wanted to decide everything, because we tried that in the past and failed miserably with the effects that are felt today. So the leadership that Chief Sack, Elder Bernard, and obviously not the story of one community, but communities across the Atlantic are feeling today is one that needs to be spoken to loudly, more clearly with respect to the rest of Canadian society, non-Indigenous people that form the majority of this country that are still opening their eyes to the reality of residential schools. And recent research shows that well over 50% are still ignorant of that reality, and that's what you folks fight against every day, and you shouldn't have to, because you're reeling from the effects still. Chief Sack spoke about intergenerational trauma. It's not a myth. It exists, it has impacts, and it's an ongoing tragedy. It's understandable that if someone was beaten because they spoke their language, that they may seek to protect their child by not passing on the language as a matter of self-defense. That's an understandable human emotion with devastating repercussions. It's not about assigning blame, but that is what a clear example of intergenerational trauma has in a community, and the devastating effect the loss of language has on identity and culture. So those supports are ones that, as you speak to survivors, as we sit around the cabinet table or the caucus table to discuss what is the next step, and as we face and push back criticism from people that say, where does this end? Did it really happen? We can't decide the next step as to what a healed country looks like without talking and having the honor to speak to survivors, like the Prime Minister and I did in Williams Lake a few weeks ago, where you may think that this is a story of devastation and tragedy, and it is, but there's always a message inevitably of hope, and that speaks to the courage of survivors, of hope not to reproduce the model that created this in the first place. And I think it's, I don't know if it was by design that we had this announcement in a school, but schools and community, according to your own curriculum, is a key step out of this. And it isn't up to Canada to decide, but really communities and nations to decide. That funding you may look at as a separate envelope, as one that has nothing to do with residential schools, but it's directly tied to the legacy of residential schools. Shipping people out of community, first on the bus, last off the bus, is still the reality of many communities in Canada today. And while the cycle of abuse in that egregious fashion may be gone, there's a model that we still have to fight back towards. And that message of hope is what we hear when we announce new schools, when we work with communities on language revitalization, when we work on mental health, and it's stuff that this government has steadfastly continued to invest in, whether it was the $300 million that we invested as a result of the results of the discoveries in Kamloops, or $200 million that are further invested in the searches that are going around the country. There's 70 projects around the country ongoing, and this is the first step in what will no doubt be one of many in getting to the bottom of a very nasty reality that is the shame of Canada, and is one that we have to acknowledge, particularly in the year where the Pope will be visiting, and we hope speaking to his and the institution that he represents responsibility in 2/3 of the schools that were run. This is sort of not in my notes, so I'll revert back, but it's my sincere hope that in these messages, in these announcements, in these commemorations, there is a a sense of healing moving forward for communities. It's not up to a guy like me to presume the outcome of what that will be, but we know it will take a long time. The government of Canada has to be there regardless of its political stripe. Hopefully it's my stripe, but I really hope that this is something that is a Canada-wide project that we support for now and for conceivably what could be well over 10 years. So thank you for that, Walalan, and glad to be back here, Mike.
Thank you very much, Minister Miller. I take it. All right, Cody. All right, now I'd like to call on the Proclamation of East Hants, Cody Blois, for a few remarks.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and let me thank the speakers that came before me, Chief Sack, for your leadership here in the community, Minister Miller, great to have you here, and to Doreen, thank you for all your work and your words today. Obviously, I'll join the echo in recognizing my colleagues, Jaime Batiste and Lena Diab. Jaime, in particular, has been, I think, having been elected with him in 2019, a really important liaison, someone that can bring an Indigenous perspective to our caucus. So Jaime, I've done it before, but I want to single you out for your advocacy as well. I also want to recognize my good friend Ian Knockwood. Ian is a municipal councillor in East Hants. We had a conversation on the way in. I don't think he's the first in Nova Scotia, but first in East Hants, and thank you, Ian, for your leadership both here in Sipekne'katik and for the district, and Lena Knockwood for her leadership here with the Indigenous Council, and I apologize if I'm missing anyone. I don't have any notes before me today, and I really just wanted to speak from the heart and give a perspective of someone that grew up close by, but has no real lived experience of what our survivors have gone through with the residential experience, but perhaps some reflections from someone that grew up 10 minutes down the road. First of all, I would say that by and large, and Marc really touched upon this, about the fact that a lot of people don't know about the residential school system writ large. Mike touched on it as well, that it's this idea that somehow it was 200 years ago and not just literally 20 or 30 years ago in terms of the last one. That stands true here in this community of East Hants as well, and I think the understanding has come a long way. But being 31, going through Hants East Rural High, which I don't question my credentials and my education, but our knowledge and the fact that we were right in the backyard of where this happened, we really didn't have that education and that depth of knowledge about the truth of what happens. And to Minister Miller's point, education is going to be so important in the days ahead of engaging that next generation of Canadians so that they can understand and have a full appreciation, along with some of the efforts that we know that have to happen as part of reconciliation. Doreen touched upon the importance of commemoration. I used to play ball in Sipekne'katik. I was a proud Shibby Lion. I would drive through the community, and my father or my mother would say, there was the site of the residential school. And of course, there's not a physical building there anymore. That was tore down before my lifetime. But there was nothing to give credence or significance to the harms that happened there. Doreen mentioned, of course, on September 30th, we had an important unveiling of the plaque at the National Historic Site. But in my own view, as the Member of Parliament here, we need to do more to continue to educate, to, again, not through my eyes, but through the eyes of those who lived it. How can we tell that story? How can we make sure that people not only in this community know the full truth of what happened, but as was mentioned, this was a place that brought Indigenous children from all across the Maritimes. And so that story, that harm, and that truth really needs to be told. Obviously very proud of the fact that the government has put money and resources on the table to help support the initiatives. I really want to give credit to Chief Sack and his council, and I know Jonathan Fowler. I was maybe 6 or 7 months ago when the first work was being undertaken. You didn't wait around. You wanted to move, and that's a credence to your leadership and the work that you've done. I'm glad that we were able to be a part of it, and I know that, to your point, Mike, there's more work to be done in the days ahead. And to the media, thank you for being here. I want to point out you guys specifically because you have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure Canadians know about this, and that is important through media. That's through television, print. Make sure that people know the full truth of what happened here. So I'm going to leave it at that. Stuart, thank you for your leadership, and I just, to the Eastern Eagles, I always get shivers when I hear the honor song or any type of your music. It's truly beautiful. Of course, we had Peter Julian inducted into the East Hants Sport Hall of Fame. I think it might have been 4 or 5 years ago. People still talk about how that was one of the best events of the Hall of Fame with the music and how we incorporated that. So thank you to you. Stuart, I'll turn it back. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cody, for your words. I'd like to thank everyone for their words today. I'd like to thank everyone in attendance. If I can call on Chief Sack, come up, and Minister Miller, please come forward.
Yeah, Minister Miller, very, that's me or somebody else, but for us, it's a very high honor to receive an eagle feather, and we appreciate you being here, and just thank you again. And so I guess now it'll be if there's questions for you. I think you're on a hot seat, and
Before we do questions, can we just have you guys come around the front of the podium just to do a couple of pictures there? And then we'll do questions right after that. Okay. Wait one more minute for Keith. There we go. All right, and if we could have Cody and Doreen, if you guys can come and join too. Just wait, hold still just for one more minute. There we go. Okay, is everybody good?
Thank you.
Okay, all right, everybody, we'll just have everybody help us speak to the first questions, just let us know, and we'll have the speaker come to the podium. Okay, first, oh, no, you don't have to. Okay. You just let us know what you want to ask the question. Okay, Minister Miller?
Hi, hello, Felicia Chandler, CBC News. Just 2 quick questions, if I could. What kind of options is the Canadian government working on right now to bring fugitive father Revoir to justice?
And thanks for the question. And Father Revoir, as people may know, was accused of atrocious acts in the far north. There has been tremendous advocacy by Nathan Obed, President Obed, on behalf of ITK to bring him to justice. More recently with the Pope, it's work that is ongoing internally with the Minister of Justice. It's not an uncomplex issue. If I could go there tomorrow and drag him here myself to be accountable to the people that he hurt, I would do it myself. in this country, there are extradition laws. They are complicated. It requires people to come forward with accusations. It then requires an internal work to be done at the Department of Justice in order to look as to whether the host country, which is France, who does not extradite their own. Roman Polanski is the most notable example with respect to charges that are outstanding in the U.S. So this is work that has to be done diplomatically. It has to be done legally, but we're hopeful that with the advocacy of the Pope, this is something that could happen. This is a man of advanced age. It doesn't mean he should escape prosecution on the land where he hurt people. But I can't speak more to this. This is really an issue that is one that is currently being handled by the Minister of Justice, and that work is ongoing.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up question. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Is the Canadian government, do you know if they're working at all with the French government to bring Father Bouvard to Canada, so he might face, a new sexual assault charge here or in France?
There's nothing I can share publicly with you at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Maureen? Maureen, good with West News. I have a few questions, but I guess my first question is, what more field work needs to be done? I understand that there was some ground radar scan that was done on the land. I guess what was the final result of that? What more needs to be done?
Yeah, and perhaps these are all works depending on the community that's done in stage and depending the protocols that are put in place as to what further searches need to be done. I'll speak to it briefly. My knowledge is much more limited compared to perhaps Chief Sacker or Elder Bernard. I did have the chance to watch some of the work being done this summer, and it was quite extensive. My understanding was it was a limited plot that was searched. There may be more work to be done with respect to community consultation, those survivors that are ongoing. I could speak generally across the country as to what is going on. There's about 70 projects ongoing. There was well over 120, 130 sites that operated residential schools. It doesn't mean one project, one site. There are still places, there are people have not decided whether they go forward, and there are places like Kamloops or Williams Lake that are quite advanced in their thinking, knowing that it'll take much more time. And then there are some for a lot of reasons that haven't started. But the answer really is it depends. It depends on the pace and demand and needs that a community has expressed after having consulted all the other communities that had kids dragged to these places. So there is very much an uneven pace across the country. But it's something that we have to be prepared for because we can't force people to do things, and nor should we in any sense of the imagination. It's really something that is community-led according to what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission tells us across the country. But I'll let Elder Bernard or Chief Sack speak to what's going on and what the next step is, because I said this announcement is the tip of the iceberg in terms of financing.
Thank you, Minister Miller. So, yeah, we have a lot more ground search to do and such. There's 70% of it was completed. There's still more to go on, and it depends on Dr. Jonathan Fowler and his team and when they're able to get back at it. And when we know more, we'll definitely be updating everyone else.
And I guess my other question is, what type of research and knowledge gathering needs to be conducted for this particular project? Want me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay. What type of research and knowledge gathering needs to be conducted for this project?
Well, I think it's the reaching out to survivors, because there's many oral history passed down through generations, and so the input will not only be from the survivors from Indian Brook, but throughout the Maritimes that have those stories and the history that they learned about the residential school. So it's important that their voices are heard, and I think many have told stories to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission about what they saw, what they witnessed, or what they heard. And I think it's important that those are incorporated into anything that we do going forward on searching the research on the site and the surrounding area.
Just one more question. Which organization will administer the funding?
That, a couple of things I just want to echo, I guess, that it is the Maritimes. It's all of the communities in the Maritimes. And a number of times we sent out a letter to communities hoping that anyone that knew anything would inform us on what was going on so we could pass it along to the team of researchers. The money, I assume, was being filtered through our community and being put out that way. But yeah, that's, as of right now, we just need knowledge from people, and it's hard, like you can't press it. Some people don't want to talk about it, or it's, I couldn't imagine driving through that site knowing what happened there, and I guess I'd take the other way every time I would, right? So, yeah, thank you.
We have a couple of French questions in French.
I don't talk French.
J'aimerais vous entendre en français, ministre Miller, sur justement ce financement, à quoi ça va servir et pourquoi c'est important.
Merci, merci pour la question. D'abord, c'est un financement de 320 000 $ pour appuyer les recherches et les consultations qui sont réaffectées quant au pensionnat de Sipekne'katik, qui a desservi plusieurs communautés autochtones à travers les maritimes, dont la communauté de Sipekne'katik. C'est, comme je l'ai dit en anglais, la pointe de l'iceberg. Il y a plusieurs communautés qui sont en réflexion assez profonde quant au protocole à établir. Quant aux recherches, sachez que c'est plus que des recherches radars à travers des terrains connus ou inconnus ou à connaître. C'est des consultations approfondies avec des survivants, avec des aînés qui, pour certains parlent, s'expriment pour la première fois. Donc, un processus de triangulation, de consultation, d'accompagnement. Si je parle du reste du pays, quant aux 70 projets qui sont présentement en financement, ça dépend du protocole arrêté de la communauté en tant que telle. Donc, il y a des communautés qui sont très avancées dans leur recherche, qui font des fouilles depuis fort longtemps, avec leur propre argent, parfois avec de l'argent du gouvernement fédéral, mais de d'autres institutions. Alors, ce qu'on a fait après les découvertes à Kamloops, c'est de trouver un point charnière au gouvernement fédéral pour ne pas mettre des entraves aux communautés qui sont en deuil et qui sont en charge de financement d'accompagnement en santé mentale, parfois pour des enjeux de réflexion, de destruction des buildings eux-mêmes, des projets de santé mentale, de consultation, de recherche et d'accompagnement avec des communautés quant aux prochaines étapes. Et évidemment, en sachant que ce n'était pas nécessairement une institution par communauté. Ce protocole peut être très, très, très élaboré et complexe, dépendant du nombre de communautés qui se doivent d'être consultées avant de procéder à une recherche. Et ensuite, la question inévitable des recherches plus approfondies, des enterrements et des recherches en ADN qui sont vraiment à leur enfance pour l'instant, parce que pour l'instant, il n'y a pas une communauté qui veut encore faire des recherches de ce niveau-là, mais il faut être préparé pour la prochaine étape qui sera tout aussi traumatisante. Donc, la réponse assez brute, c'est que ça dépend, mais dans ce cas-ci, c'est l'étape initiale d'un financement qui suivra avec d'autres demandes avec cause, évidemment.
Merci beaucoup. And my follow-up is for Chief Sack. Because the research has been going on for almost a year now. You said it was about 70% complete. I'm wondering how the community is feeling, like 1 year after the search has started, or with what's been found so far. Like, what is the feeling here, and how much of this new one?
Yeah, I think for the feeling is kind of an emotional roller coaster. There's, it's always hard to talk about, it's uncertainty of, I think it's good if there was anyone missing found, could set them free and celebrate their life. But on the other hand, that's a child that was taken and hurt and harmed. So the search for us stopped because of the farmers' fields in the area. We only had permission for so long, and when it's that time again, we'll be able to access those fields. We would definitely go back and look for the remainder.
Minister Miller, just a quick question here. The Truth and Reconciliation Report was published well over 5 years ago. Communities are losing survivors every year. Can you speak to why it's taken this long to put this support forward?
I don't think there's any excuse that a guy like me could stand here and present as credible as to why it's taken so long. And there isn't really. This was, as I mentioned in my speech, written on black and white in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Calls to Action 72 through 76. I'm not going to suggest at the same time it's easy or that the Canadian government should be forcing it. We certainly have had resources available. They have not been sufficient. And I think the discoveries in Kamloops that in part were supported by the Government of Canada, and there was monies put into it, but communities really were engaged themselves, wanted to get to the bottom of things, and were doing things on their own, whether we're talking about sites in Brandon, Cowessess, or Kamloops or others. But the shocking discoveries in Kamloops that has sort of seized the world attention on this have, I think, shaken Canadians to their core, but also shaken our government in how we approach things, how we need to do things quicker. And certainly when you talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, they're not all the federal government. Witness the demand for the Pope to apologize as a particular example. There are ones that do not fall outside our jurisdiction. Doesn't mean we absolve ourselves from the need to push for it. But certainly there are ones that are easier to do than others. One equally as profound as the other. But when it comes to these calls, and particularly coming out of 2 years of pandemic where everyone has been focused on keeping each other safe and keeping each other alive, this sort of doubled down on the mental health hit that communities have been taking. So, we've put now close to $500 million at the disposal of communities. That perhaps won't be enough. We won't really know until we work with communities to see what the next steps will be. But there will be a more need to walk with and accompany communities in their search for the truth, whether that's actual searches on sites or the work that we need to do and that's on us into getting to the bottom of the information that we still hold, or any piece of information that can help a survivor get a sense of closure. And that information can be could be lost in the National Archives. It could be held by Crown-Indigenous Relations. It could be held by the Minister of Justice. So there's some work to be done on the Government of Canada into helping survivors groups get more elements of truth. And those are all resources that we spoke to in the last budget announcement that we'll have to continue working with communities. I wouldn't stand here and say that I'm going to wash my hands of it because a community doesn't decide to go forward. There are clear reasons why people want to take their time, and it's it's obviously difficult as a politician to stand here and say, I don't get to decide, because most of the time you want to be the person deciding, but it isn't our place. The RCMP can't go stomping into communities and creating a crime scene as people have demanded. They have to do so at the invitation of the community, and nor can the federal government sort of dictate the pace. But we certainly have to get the money in people's hands and get it out of the way when it's required, and help with any specialized assets that we may have when it is required. There was a lot of, for example, interest in the Kamloops site, and we had to close the airspace, or that we do have forensic work that the armed forces can do that others perhaps can't. So those are all particularly assets that as we look at a whole of government approach, what Canada can do to help communities that are in pain. But this isn't going to end tomorrow, and I think worse. We need to be prepared for more discoveries, and it's very difficult to be emotionally prepared as a country for that. But given the number of projects ongoing, it's inevitable that there will be more discoveries, and they are just as wounding and just as triggering as the discoveries in Kamloops or whatever may be discovered in Sipekne'katik.
Mr. Miller, hi, it's from APTN News, and the delegates coming back from Rome and the Vatican, and you spoke about progress and discovery and learning and education, and lately it seems like we're starting to make progress, right? With the Pope coming and the search in schools and stuff. Is the Liberal government prepared to hold the Catholic Church accountable and ask them to release the records that has been asked to release for so many years, and would probably help residential school survivors heal and move forward. And that information might even help in these searches that, communities are paying for and the government is paying for.
Yeah, I mean, in any issue of search for truth, and then the next step of accountability, we have to look at our role and what role we can play with the Catholic Church in this instance, as co-conspirators, frankly. And the reality is, we are currently working with the Catholic Church and moving forward on the disclosure of documents. We have our own work to do, and I won't shy away from that. My team recently disclosed thousands and thousands of documents to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, so that they can be more of a third neutral party where survivors can go and get answers. It shouldn't be up to Canada to dictate to survivors what documents they get and what they don't. There are immense privacy concerns. Some people have disclosed information that is only up to them to release, and so that is a challenge. But it isn't the only one. There's a lot of stuff that we've been holding back that we shouldn't have, perhaps under some legal obligation, but we do have a moral obligation to get things into people's hands. So does the Catholic Church, and we will bring our advocacy to bear as the case may be. So far in my own discussions with the various Catholic entities that I've interacted with, I've seen a sense of good faith in trying to get to the bottom of things. There are some entities that no longer exist, so the location of that documentation needs extra work. There are other institutions that have information that perhaps we don't have, or we have in duplicate format, that should be disclosed, ideally to survivors, but to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, that I would note was funded for a new building, because the building that they have and the resources they have is inadequate. So that institution itself will be getting a lot of pressure over the next few years. But as we have a more coordinated approach to information gathering, we have to present an open book to people and search for answers. And the religious entities involved shouldn't escape from that duty as well. It's their moral obligation, and they know it, frankly. The pressure will only become greater with the visit, I believe, of the Pope in late summer, fall.
In your work, you use the unfortunate criticism that people ask, where does this end? What do you say to Canadians when we pose that question?
That question we could speak a long time about, but I think it has its basis in ignorance and disbelief as to what actually occurred. So when I've spoken to people that have called me out on this, and usually my answer to them is go talk to your kids, because they're getting educated in school where you weren't, and I wasn't. So I'm in no different position than they were. I've only learned this later in life. But the reality is that there is a tendency in this country to continue to deny the existence of residential schools and its current impact on folks today. We can't hide out from that truth, because once we acknowledge it, we can move to repair it. And unfortunately, that education role falls on the shoulders of people beside me that are reeling from what's going on in their communities and their community members being triggered. So often when you hear, where does it end? It's really a reflection of the need to understand what the actual issue is, because this started, scooping children started 500 years ago. It predates Canada, and it continues, and that's the challenge that we all face today. And understanding in that context is the first step forward. But I think once you have that conversation person to person, ideally it shouldn't be the role necessarily of just politicians to be talking about this, but I hear my kids talking about it more and more. So there's hope in the next generation, where our generation frankly failed in it. But there's a hurdle to overcome, and it's a hurdle that people want to just close their eyes and close their minds and walk away, because it's too traumatic to face. But I don't think it ends anytime soon, frankly.
Do we have time for just a couple more minutes?
One more, Chief Sack. Chief Sack, a few months ago there was an announcement, a funding announcement about money for First Nations to deal with mental health on their own. Can you talk a little bit about how these two announcements kind of working together?
Yeah, as I listen to Mr. Miller speak, I can't help but think of all of the needs that my community has in the mental health, and surprisingly, I'm very grateful that we made it through. COVID was rough on everyone. You condense all of our people into a smaller community, and it's 10 times worse. So we have a lot of stuff going forward, a lot of ideas, a lot of plans to help our people. It's just a matter of funding to do so. And I could go on all day about the lack of funding that we do receive. Today, I'm grateful that they're here and they're announcing some funding. But as the day goes on, I'm going to be hitting them every which way for more money, I guess. So, yeah, they didn't know that was coming, but that'll be the rest of the day, I guess.
Bien, il y a tout un processus de demande et de triage qui se fait à l'interne avec les communautés qui sont affectées. Comme je l'ai dit dans mon discours, c'est le début. Je ne présume aucunement que c'est la fin de la discussion. C'est pour accompagner les communautés dans leur recherche continue, compenser en partie ce qui a déjà été fait. Sachez qu'ils ont déjà fait quelque chose et des recherches assez étoffées l'été passé. Mais il reste beaucoup à faire, là, donc que ce soit les recherches elles-mêmes ou que ce soit les protocoles d'entente qui peuvent par la suite tisser avec d'autres communautés quant à l'éventuelle découverte de fouilles, que ce soit les accompagnements en santé mentale, ça touche à l'interne de notre gouvernement la commémoration qui peut se trouver de façon administrative dans Patrimoine Canada ou de plaques commémoratives, etc. Que ce soit les appuis en santé mentale qui touchent services aux Autochtones ou bien l'argent qui vient appuyer les communautés elles-mêmes qui viennent de mon département. Donc, ça dépend des requêtes individuelles et des demandes qui sont tissées sur mesure et présentées à notre département. Alors, il faudrait vraiment rentrer dans la demande elle-même pour voir pourquoi c'est précisément 320 000 et quelques pièces, mais ça dépend de la communauté.
Like you, I went to Nancy's and did learn about the Sipekne'katik residential school. Is there opportunity to fit that into the education system to learn more, especially at Nancy's?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Pat. Look, you and I both went to Hants East, and what I would say is, for me, one of the most important moments in even understanding what happened here in Sipekne'katik was with Roger Lewis. So Roger is the curator of Mi'kmaq history at the Nova Scotia Museum. He's a residential school survivor himself. And of course, the building doesn't exist, but the plastic factory is on that site. And for him to sit there and to explain, this is where the boys' dormitory was, this is where the girls' dormitory. After breakfast, we would have to go to prayer. On weekends, we were required to go work on farmers' field. That type of intimate knowledge and just that story was profound for me. And again, I wasn't ignorant to the fact that there was residential schools, but I think until you hear that perspective from someone who has lived it, it's very difficult to be able to try to relate. And so I think that storytelling, obviously some of the public education is in the provincial domain. Jaime and I and Minister Miller had the opportunity to be in Annapolis Valley First Nation yesterday. We talked about some of the important treaty education that frankly Premier McNeil has started and this province has continued. That type of initiative I think is extremely important. Minister Miller also highlighted some of the importance of individuals who are the best place to tell those stories are also the ones that are going through that trauma and that reeling at this time. So I guess I would just simply say, yes, it's extremely important. And I do see a change. You know, I have a youth council here in Kings Hants. We have young people that are understanding and learning about this and are much more informed, as Minister Miller has said, even with his own children. And so I think that is where we learn, that's where we build, and that's where we continue the work in the days ahead, beyond residential schools, but just on the path on reconciliation.
All right, thank you, everyone. We got a few more things to go. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And this is going to conclude our portion this afternoon. So Have a safe drive back to your respective locations, and community members, thank you very much for being here.
And the press release is live too
Yep.
now online. You can use that for reference.